He dropped $1 in my drink and walked off with my wife. I smiled and left without a word. Next morning her key didn't fit the door. Then his lawyer called, shaking, because that quiet man he dismissed in front of a room full of people had already been 3 steps ahead of him the entire time. My name is Richard Frost. I'm 53 years old. I'm a managing partner at a corporate asset law firm I built from a 2-desk office in Charlotte, North Carolina. I've spent 30 years learning how institutions protect themselves, how wealth moves quietly, and how agreements hold or fall apart under pressure. Turns out that knowledge cuts both ways. Vivian and I had been married for 22 years. She was 49, sharp-looking, the kind of woman who walked into a room and made people straighten up without meaning to. For most of our marriage, that energy worked in our favor. Then somewhere around year 17, it stopped working for us and started working for her alone. She'd built a nutrition and wellness consulting practice. Nothing wrong with that. I encouraged it, paid for the certifications, the studio space, the branding consultant, the retreats she hosted twice a year in Asheville. What I didn't pay for was my own invisibility, but apparently that came free with the package. The party was held at the Harrington Estate on a Friday, in late October. Old money crowd, new money pretenders, and everyone in between trying to figure out which category they belonged to. Vivian wore a deep green dress and moved through the room like she owned every square foot of it. I stayed close for the first hour. By the second, I was a piece of furniture. That's when Clifford Aldis entered the picture. He was 50, CEO of some tech startup that had been making noise in the fintech space. Tailor navy suit, the kind of confidence that comes from never having been told no by anyone who mattered to him. He made his way to Vivian like he already knew the route. I watched from across the room. She laughed too fast at whatever he said, touched his arm, tilted her head back the way she used to do with me a long time ago. I walked over, not to cause a scene, just to exist. Clifford looked at me the way men look at something they've already decided isn't a threat. Then he did something I will never forget as long as I live. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a single dollar bill, and set it down on the rim of my untouched glass of bourbon. Casual, deliberate, like tipping a coat check attendant. "Don't worry about her tonight," he said, not even lowering his voice. "She's in good hands." Vivian didn't flinch. She didn't look at me. She just smiled at the marble floor like she was waiting for me to disappear. The room got very quiet in that specific way rooms do when everyone's pretending not to watch. I looked at the dollar. I looked at him. I looked at her. Then I picked up my bourbon, finished it in one slow pull, set the glass down on top of the bill, and walked out. No raised voice. No pointed finger. No scene. I heard someone behind me mutter something. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. Because what Clifford Aldis didn't know, what Vivian had apparently never bothered to tell him, was that the boring, quiet husband she'd been tolerating for years had spent 3 decades learning exactly how to dismantle people like him. Legally. Permanently. Without leaving a mark. He'd handed me $1. By the time this was over, he'd hand me everything else too. He just didn't know it yet. And neither did she. I didn't go back to the Harrington Estate. I didn't sit in the parking lot waiting. I didn't call her 17 times and leave increasingly desperate voicemails. I drove home, poured 2 fingers of bourbon, the good stuff, not the party glass she'd contaminated with Clifford Aldis's theater, and sat in my study. The house was quiet. 22 years of accumulated quiet, the kind that settles into the walls of a place after the kids grow up, and the dinner parties stop, and the 2 people living inside it stop asking each other real questions. Colin had left for Berlin 4 years ago. Sharp kid, built like his old man, not in the physical sense, but in the way he thought. Methodical, patient, didn't show his hand until the last possible second. I'd paid for every semester of his education abroad, every internship application fee, every professional development course. Vivian had told him it was her management of our household finances that made it possible. I never corrected that. Figured the truth would surface eventually. It always does. I sat in that study until midnight. Didn't hear from her. Didn't expect to. What I did do was open my laptop and make 3 phone calls. One to my personal attorney, one to the security firm I've been working with quietly for the past 6 weeks, and one to the locksmith I'd already briefed 2 days earlier. The last call was the shortest. For words, tomorrow morning, 7 sharp. Here's what people don't understand about men like me. We don't react. We've already acted. The party wasn't a trigger. It was a confirmation. I've been watching the pattern for months. The late wellness consultations. The clients she never named. The weekend retreat in Asheville where she came back with a new perfume and a story that had 3 inconsistencies I clocked in the first 30 seconds. I hadn't confronted her. I documented. By the time Clifford dropped that dollar on my glass, I had 6 weeks of security footage from the firm's parking garage, 2 months of financial records showing joint account withdrawals I hadn't authorized, and a folder in my firm's private server that would make any mediator's hair stand on end. I was an angry husband. I was a prepared one. At 1:14 in the morning, my phone lit up. Text for Vivian. Don't wait up. 3 words. Not a question. Not an apology. A directive. Like she was managing a schedule. I set the phone face down and went to bed. She wasn't home when I woke up. I wasn't surprised. I made coffee, fed the dog, read through 2 contracts that needed my signature by Monday. At 6:58, the locksmith's van pulled up. By 7:40, every exterior lock on the property had been replaced. New keys in my jacket pocket. Security panel updated. Gate code changed. At 8:15, I called my assistant and told her to flag any communication for Vivian Frost to the firm's general line as non-priority. Professional courtesy. Nothing more. Then I drove across town to the service department I'd leased 10 days prior. A clean, functional 2-bedroom in the Dilworth neighborhood, and sat at the kitchen table with a fresh cup of coffee and my laptop. The security system at the house was linked to my phone. Every camera, every sensor. I didn't have to be there to see what happened when she came home. I opened the live feed at 11:47 a.m. and watched her Uber pull up to the gate. She was still in the green dress. Hair pulled back now, loose strands at the neck. She walked to the front door with the confident stride of a woman who expects the world to hold still while she catches up with it. Slid her key in. Turned it. Stopped. Tried again. Harder this time, like the door owed her something. Then the knock. 2 firm raps. Then 3 more. Then the phone pressed her ear. My phone showed the call. I let go to voicemail. She tried twice more. Both times, voicemail. She stepped back, and that's when she saw the small printed notice mounted on the door frame. I'd had it laminated. Property access updated. Legal counsel retained. Contact information enclosed. She stood very still for a moment, and I watched that stillness from 6 miles away with my coffee going cold on the table beside me, and something that wasn't satisfaction exactly, more like resolution. The kind you feel when a long equation finally balances. Vivian had spent years building a version of our life where I was the background, the funding mechanism, the placeholder. She'd made herself the story and tucked me into a footnote. But footnotes have a habit of outlasting the chapters they're attached to. Her next call wasn't to me. It was to her sister Sheila. I knew because Sheila texted me 11 minutes later. Just 5 words. She's outside. You doing okay? I typed back too. I'm fine. And I meant it. Sheila called me at 2 in the afternoon. Not a text this time. An actual call, which told me the situation outside my house had escalated past what a 5-word message could contain. I answered on the second ring. Richard. Her voice was careful. Sheila had always been the steadier of the 2 sisters. Less polish, more substance. She's been outside for almost 2 hours. She's asking me to come over. That's your call to make, I said. I'm not stopping you. A pause. Are you okay? Better than I've been in a while, honestly. Another pause, longer this time. I figured something like this was coming. I want you to know I'm not taking sides. I'm not asking you to. She exhaled. She's going to call your mother next if I don't show up. My mother lives in Asheville and doesn't answer unknown numbers, I said. Vivian knows that. Sheila almost laughed. Almost. Okay, I'll go. But Richard, just so you know, she told me Clifford is a business connection. That last night was networking. I let that sit for a moment. Sheila, I said finally, I've spent 30 years reading contracts written by people who needed me to believe exactly what they wanted me to believe. I know what networking looks like. And I know what a dollar dropped into a man's drink looks like. Silence. I'll check in with you later, I said, and ended the call. I pulled up the gate camera feed on my laptop. Vivian was sitting on the front step now, heels beside her, phone in both hands. She looked like someone who had just discovered that the building they owned actually belonged to someone else, which, in every legal sense that mattered, was precisely correct. The house had been in my name since the day we bought it, part of a broader asset structure I'd built methodically over 20 years. Vivian had signed the refinancing documents in 2016 without reading past page 3. I knew because I watched her do it. She'd been on the phone with a client the entire time, initialing boxes with the efficiency of someone clearing an inbox. Those initials had reaffirmed every protective clause in the original agreement. At 3:15, Sheila's car appeared on the gate camera. She parked, walked up to Vivian, and the two of them talked for several minutes. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I could read posture. Sheila kept her arms crossed. Vivian kept gesturing at the door. Eventually, Sheila shook her head, once, firmly, and pointed toward her own car. Vivian stood up, grabbed her shoes, got in the passenger seat. I closed the laptop and went for a walk. Charlotte in late October has a particular quality. The air goes sharp and clean, the leaves on the oaks go amber and rust, and the city slows down just enough to think. I walked 6 blocks and thought about Colin. He was in Berlin, running analytics for a fintech company, doing well by any reasonable measure. He thought his mother had managed the household finances brilliantly to fund his education. He'd said in his last birthday call to her, "Mom, I don't know how you pulled it off." She'd accepted the gratitude without a word of correction. I let it go then. I wouldn't let it go much longer. At 4:40, my phone buzzed. Not Vivian. Her mother, Helen. I didn't answer. Helen was 74, sharp as a tack, and had never particularly warmed to me. I suspected she'd be calling to deliver a verdict before she'd heard the evidence. I'd deal with Helen in my own time, on my own terms. What I did do was draft a short email to my firm's senior associate and attach 2 documents: the amended trust structure and the updated beneficiary designations. Everything I'd prepared over the past 6 weeks, now formally filed. Clean, precise, and already on record with 3 separate institutional parties before Vivian had finished knocking on a door that no longer recognized her key. I stopped at a coffee shop on Providence Road and ordered a black coffee. Sat by the window. Watched people walk by with their dogs and their strollers and their ordinary Friday afternoons. The dollar was still sitting in my memory like a splinter. Not because it hurt, because it clarified. Some men need a crisis to act. I'd already been acting. The dollar just confirmed I'd been right to start when I did. My phone showed 1 new voicemail. Vivian. I didn't play it. I filed it the same way I file everything. Noted, cataloged, set aside for the appropriate moment. The appropriate moment was coming. Just not yet. I was reviewing a deposition summary at my desk in the Dilworth apartment when Vivian's number lit up my screen for the 4th time that evening. I let it go to voicemail, same as the others. But 30 seconds later, a different number appeared, one I didn't recognize, with a 615 area code that wasn't local to Charlotte. I answered. "Is this Richard Frost?" The voice was male, tightly controlled, but fraying at the edges the way voices do when someone's trying to project calm they don't actually feel. "It is. This is Clifford Aldous." A beat. "I think we need to talk." I leaned back in my chair and said nothing. In 30 years of legal work, I'd learned that silence is the most underutilized tool in any conversation. Clifford filled it. "I got a letter today. Hand-delivered to my office. Not through email, physical delivery, addressed to me personally." "Go on," I said. It referenced my company's vendor agreements. Specifically a data licensing contract my startup finalized last quarter with a firm called Ardenfield Compliance Group. His voice tightened. "Your name is listed as a founding partner." "That's accurate," I said. A long pause. "You never said anything. You never asked," I replied. "You were busy with other things." I heard him pulling a breath. The letter outlines a potential conflict of interest. It references specific dates, specific meetings, specific documentation of a personal relationship between you and, he stopped, "between your wife and me." "Former partner," I said. The filing was completed this morning. The silence on his end stretched long enough that I could hear traffic in the background wherever he was standing. "This could end my company," he said finally. "Low now. The theater completely gone. If the Ardenfield contract gets flagged for vendor neutrality violations, every investor we have is going to..." "Mr. Aldous." I kept my voice even. "You walked into a room last Friday night and placed $1 on the rim of my glass. In front of witnesses. You made a decision about what I was worth in that moment." I paused. "I made a different kind of decision. I made it 6 weeks ago. Actually, long before the party." Another long silence. What do you want? He asked. Nothing from you, I said. The documentation has already been submitted to the relevant compliance board. That process runs on its own timeline now. What you do with the information is your business. You're not going to. He stopped again. You're just going to let the process run. That's what processes are for, I said. I heard his breathing change. She never told me who you were. She said you were. He caught himself. I know what she said. I told him. She believed it too for a long time. That's the thing about quiet men, Mr. Aldous. People tend to fill in the blanks with whatever's most convenient for them. I ended the call, set the phone face down on the desk, and went back to the deposition summary. 15 minutes later, a text arrived from a number I recognized as Vivian's. What did you do? Clifford just called me screaming. He said you own the company he works with. He said you never told me your husband already had him. Richard, what I asked this? I read it twice. Set the phone down again. What it was 30 years of preparation meeting one very expensive Friday night. I went to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and stood at the window looking out at the Dilworth streetlights coming on one by one in the early dark. She'd built a version of me in her head that suited her life. A version that could be handed $1 and dismissed. And she'd introduced that version to a man who had no idea he'd been operating inside a structure I'd spent decades building. He thought he was taking something from me. He'd actually walked straight into it. Sheila called me the next morning at 9. She skipped the pleasantries. She's at my place, she said. She stayed the night. Richard, she's not doing well. I appreciate you telling me, I said. She keeps saying you froze everything out of spite, that this is a control move. A pause. I didn't agree with her. I want you to know that. What did you say? I said that men who act out of spite don't spend months preparing legal documentation. Another pause. She didn't like that very much. I almost smiled. Sheila, I'm not going to ask you to manage her. Just keep me in the loop if anything changes on your end. There's one more thing. Her voice dropped. Your mother-in-law called me this morning. Helen. She's driving up from Greenville. She's telling people you've been controlling Vivian for years. She already talked to 2 women from Vivian's wellness circle. I set my coffee down. Helen, 74 years old, sharp tongue, absolute conviction in her daughter's version of every story she'd ever heard. She'd spent years treating me like a piece of furniture that Vivian had unfortunately kept from a previous apartment. When does she arrive? I asked. This afternoon. Thank you, Sheila. I ended the call and sat with that information for a few minutes. Then I opened my laptop and pulled up the folder I'd labeled Simply HB, Helen Bradshaw. Inside were 3 years of payment records. Anonymous transfers from one of my holding accounts to a private medical billing service in Greenville, South Carolina. Helen had a chronic kidney condition that required quarterly treatments. Her Medicare coverage had a gap. Vivian had told me about it in passing years ago, mentioned it once, forgot about it the same afternoon. I hadn't forgotten. I'd set up the payments quietly, never mentioned them to either of them. 37 payments over 3 years. Not a word from Helen about where the coverage shortfall was being filled. Either she didn't know, or she decided not to ask. Either way, that information had a time and a place. It wasn't today, but it was coming. Meanwhile, across town, Vivian was apparently doing what people do when the ground shifts under them. She was searching. I knew this because Sheila texted me at 11:14. She's been on her laptop for 2 hours. I looked over her shoulder. She's Googling you. I read that and leaned back in my chair. Let her look. What Vivian would find wasn't a LinkedIn profile with a generic headshot and a list of bar association memberships. She'd find articles in trade publications going back 15 years. She'd find my name attached to a framework that 40-something private firms now used as a standard for asset protection. She'd find a quote from a Business Journal piece. I remembered giving the interview, a rare exception to my usual policy of staying out of print, where I'd said something along the lines of, the strongest legal structures are the ones the other party never thinks to examine. She'd find the name Hartwell Asset Partners, the holding group that sat above my law firm and 3 other entities. She'd find the Ardenfield Compliance Group, which had sent Clifford his letter. She'd find years of quiet, methodical work that she'd been living on top of without ever once looking down. I wondered what that felt like. Realizing the floor you'd been dismissing was actually the foundation. My phone rang at 1:30. A number I didn't recognize, but I knew before I answered. Richard. Helen's voice was clipped, controlled. the voice of a woman who considered composure a form of weaponry. I want you to explain yourself. Hello, Helen. I hope the drive up was smooth. Don't do that. Sharp. Don't be pleasant with me right now. My daughter is sitting at her sister's kitchen table with nothing. No access to her home. No cards. Nothing. You did that. I did, I said. A pause. She hadn't expected me to confirm it that directly. That is cruel, she said. That is the act of a man who wants to punish. It's the act of a man who prepared for a situation he hoped wouldn't happen, I replied. There's a difference. She made a mistake. Helen. I kept my voice even. I'm not going to litigate this with you over the phone. What I will tell you is that the decisions I've made are legal, documented, and already on record with multiple institutions. If Vivian wants to contest any of them, she's welcome to retain counsel. Silence. Then, with less certainty, you're serious. I've been serious about this marriage for 22 years, I said. I was apparently the only one. She started to say something else, but I continued. I also want you to know, Helen, and I say this not as a threat, but as a fact, that there are some things about the last few years you may not be aware of. When you're ready to have a real conversation, I'm available. But right now, I'd encourage you to get the full picture before you drive to anyone else's house to deliver a verdict. A long silence. Something in her tone shifted, just slightly. A hairline fracture in the certainty. What do you mean? She asked. I mean exactly what I said. I paused. Take care of yourself, Helen. The drive back to Greenville is long. I ended the call, poured a fresh coffee, sat at the desk, and pulled up the live feed from the house cameras. The property was still, leaves collecting on the front walk. Nobody home. 30 years of building. 22 years of marriage. And in the end, all it had taken was $1 and one very public Friday night for the whole pretense to come apart. I didn't feel victorious. I felt clear, like a legal brief after the final edit. Everything unnecessary stripped away, only the essential facts remaining. Colin would call soon. I could feel it the way you feel weather changing. When he did, I'd be ready. There were things my son deserved to know. About who had actually written the checks. About who had been quiet when he should have spoken and why. About what it meant to build something real versus performing the appearance of building it. But that conversation required the right moment. And I'd spent my entire career understanding the difference between the right moment and the convenient one. Helen Bradshaw arrived at Sheila's house at 2:15 in the afternoon with a rolling carry-on, a casserole dish, and 30 years of maternal certainty packed into a 5'4" frame. By 2:45, according to Sheila's text, she had already called me a stone-cold operator, a financial tyrant, and a man who had never deserved her daughter. By 3 o'clock, she was on the phone with a local TV news tip line. I found that out from a former colleague who happened to know the assignment editor. He called me as a professional courtesy. I thanked him and didn't panic. Helen talking to a tip line was a problem with the ceiling. What she didn't know had no ceiling at all. I drove to Sheila's house at 4 o'clock. Didn't call ahead. Sheila opened the door, and to her credit, she didn't look surprised. She stepped aside without a word. The living room went very quiet when I walked in. Vivian was on the couch, still in borrowed clothes, her hands wrapped around a mug. Helen stood near the kitchen doorway like a woman guarding a perimeter. She looked at me the way prosecutors look at defendants they've already convicted internally. You have no business being here, Helen said. This is Sheila's house. I replied. I'll let Sheila make that determination. Sheila said nothing, which was answer enough. I didn't sit down. I looked at Vivian. She looked back, and for a moment the performance dropped, the injured dignity, the rehearsed outrage, and underneath it was something I recognized. The face of a person who had spent the last 18 hours discovering that the story they'd been telling themselves had significant gaps. I know you've been searching my name, I said. Not accusatory, just stating it. Vivian's jaw tightened. I didn't know half of what you were involved in. You didn't ask, I said. Not once in 22 years did you ask what I was actually building. You knew I worked. You knew money was there. That was the extent of your interest. That is not, she started. Vivian. My voice stayed level. I'm not here to argue. I'm here for one reason. I reached into my jacket and pulled out an envelope. Set on the coffee table. That's a record, I said. 37 payments over 3 years, from one of my accounts to a private medical billing service in Greenville. I looked at Helen. Your kidney treatments, Helen. The gap in your Medicare coverage. Someone's been filling that gap. Has been for 3 years. Helen went very still. That someone, I continued, was not your daughter. Vivian mentioned your situation once, in passing, approximately 3 years and 2 months ago. She forgot about it the same evening. I set up the transfers the following week. The room was absolutely silent. Helen looked at the envelope on the table, then at me, then at Vivian. Vivian's face had gone pale. You never said anything, Helen said finally. Her voice had lost its edge. There was nothing to say. I replied. You needed help. I helped. That's what you do for family. I paused. Even when family doesn't extend you the same consideration. I didn't hammer it. I didn't need to. The information had landed exactly where it needed to. Helen sat down slowly in the armchair by the window. She didn't look like a woman guarding a perimeter anymore. She looked like a woman doing arithmetic she didn't like the results of. Vivian set her mug down on the side table. Richard, I didn't come here to reconcile, I said. I came here because your mother was about to go to a television news tip line with half a story. I wanted her to have the full one before she did something she couldn't walk back. I buttoned my jacket. The divorce filing will be delivered in the next few days, I said. I'd encourage you both to read it completely before forming an opinion. Every clause has a reason. I looked at Vivian one last time. I genuinely hope you find what you were looking for. I just couldn't keep funding the search. I walked to the front door, nodded at Sheila, and left. Outside, the October air had gone sharp. I walked to my car, sat for a moment, and looked at the street. I didn't feel powerful. I felt finished. And in my experience, finished is the only thing worth working toward. Colin called on a Tuesday. I was in the middle of reviewing a trust amendment when his name appeared on my screen, and I set everything aside without hesitation. Dad. His voice was steady, but had that particular tightness young men get when they're holding something carefully. I saw the news about Clifford Aldous. I hadn't expected that to be the opening. What did you see? There's a piece in a fintech trade publication. It references a compliance disclosure involving Ardenfield Compliance Group. It names his company, and it names the firm that filed the disclosure. A pause. Your firm, Dad. That's accurate, I said. Silence. Then, how long has this been in motion? 6 weeks of preparation. The visible part happened over about 48 hours. Another silence. Longer. I could hear him processing the way he always processed, methodically, building the picture piece by piece before committing to a response. He'd gotten that from me. I noticed it when he was 14 and never said anything about it, because some things you just watch with quiet pride. Mom called me yesterday, he said finally. She told me you froze everything and locked her out without warning. That it came out of nowhere. It didn't come out of nowhere, I said. What did you tell her? I told her I needed to hear your side before I said anything. A pause. She didn't like that. I imagine not. I leaned back in my chair. Colin, there's something I need to tell you. I've been carrying it for a while, and you deserve to hear it directly from me. Okay. The tuition, the housing deposits in Berlin, the professional licensing fees, the certification programs, the emergency transfer you received in your second year when your landlord raised the rent with 2 weeks' notice. I kept my voice even. All of it came from my accounts. Directly. I set up the transfers. I managed the timing. I made sure there was never a gap. A very long silence. Mom said she managed the household finances, he said. She managed a household budget that I funded entirely, I replied. There's a difference. I never corrected the record because I didn't want you carrying the weight of our marriage's structure while you were trying to build your own life. But the structure is changing now, and you should know what it was built on. I heard him exhale one long, slow breath. Dad, she let me thank her. For years. I know. On my last birthday call, she said. He stopped. She said she worked really hard to make sure I had everything I needed. She believed a version of that, I said. People often do. That's generous of you. It's accurate, I said. Generous would be pretending it didn't happen. He was quiet for another moment. Then, I'm coming home. You don't have to do that, Colin. I know I don't have to. His voice was firm in the way voices get when a decision's already made, and the statement is just a formality. I want to. I'll book a flight tonight. I'll be in Charlotte by Thursday. I didn't argue. The truth was, I wanted to see my son. Not to use him as an ally or to stage a reunion for anyone's benefit. Just to sit across the table from the person I'd spent 25 years quietly making sure had every advantage I could build for him. Thursday's fine, I said. I'll pick you up. He arrived at Charlotte Douglas just after 2 in the afternoon on Thursday, rolling a single carry-on with the efficiency of a man who'd learned to travel light. He looked like me at that age. Same jaw, same way of scanning a room when he walked into it. We shook hands first, the way we always did, and then he pulled me into a brief, firm embrace that surprised me slightly. "You look good," he said. "You look like you haven't slept on the flight." He almost smiled. "Fair." We went to a restaurant in Noda, a corner booth, good coffee, the kind of place where conversations could go long without anyone noticing. I laid out the full picture over the next 2 hours. Not with drama, not with grievance, just the facts, the timeline, the documentation, the decisions. Colin listened the way he always listened, with his hands flat on the table and his eyes on mine. When I finished, he sat with it for a moment. Then, "Clifford Aldous had no idea who you were. He had the information available to him," I said. "He chose not to use it. That's a pattern with people who think they've already assessed the situation." Mom never told him. "No." Colin turned his coffee cup slowly. "Do you think she knew? About the extent of what you built?" "I think she knew enough to live comfortably on it," I said. "Whether she understood the architecture? No. She never asked." He nodded slowly. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out his phone, opened something, and slid it across the table. It was a draft LinkedIn post. 3 paragraphs. I read it carefully. The first paragraph stated simply that his education and professional development had been funded entirely by his father, Richard Frost, and that he wanted the record corrected. The second described, briefly, what his father had built over 30 years. The third said that he respected both his parents, but that truth mattered more than comfort. I looked up. "You don't have to do this." "I know," Colin said. "That's why I want to." I slid the phone back across the table. "It's your decision." He picked it up, posted it, sat face down. "Now," he said, and reached for his coffee. "Tell me what you need from me while I'm here." That was my son. No theater, no performance, just presence. 3 days after Colin arrived in Charlotte, Vivian made her move. I found out about it the same way I found out about most things. Not through drama, but through a quiet call from someone paying attention. A colleague of mine, a woman named Patricia Oakes who ran a boutique investigative firm out of uptown Charlotte, called me at 8 in the morning. "Richard," she said, without preamble. "Someone reached out to my firm yesterday afternoon. Prospective client. Wanted opposition research on a subject." A pause. "The subject was you." I set down my coffee. "I appreciate the call, Patricia. I took the intake meeting," she continued. Woman in her late 40s. Well presented. Said she needed documentation of financial misconduct, hidden assets, evidence of control, and manipulation in a marriage. Another pause. She had a printed list of questions that read like something she drafted in a hurry. "Did she leave a name?" "Vivian Frost." Patricia's voice was dry. "She didn't seem to connect that I'd know yours." "What did you tell her?" "I told her I'd review the brief and follow up within 48 hours. Standard intake language. A beat. Then I called you. Are you returning her retainer?" "Already done," Patricia said, with a note that the firm had identified a conflict of interest and was unable to proceed. I exhaled. "Thank you, Patricia. Don't thank me. Just don't ever do anything actually worth investigating." She ended the call. I sat with the information. Vivian had tried to hire someone to build a case against me. Someone who, by reasonable professional probability, knew me. That wasn't desperation. That was panic wearing desperation's clothing. The distinction mattered because panic moves in straight lines and makes predictable choices. I could work with predictable. I called my attorney, David Kern, and briefed him on the development. He noted it, added it to the file, and told me it changed nothing legally but confirmed the timeline we'd anticipated. Colin was in the other room working remotely, laptop open, calls muted. When I walked in and told him what had happened, he looked up from his screen and said, "She hired a PI against you." "Tried to." He turned back to his laptop. "How many firms in Charlotte know your name professionally?" "Enough," I said. He nodded once and went back to work. No lecture, no commentary. That was enough. The next development came 2 days later, and it came from an unexpected direction. Clifford Aldous' business partner, a man named Roy Tillman, called my office line. Roy was a co-founder at Clifford's startup, someone I'd encountered once at a conference 3 years prior. He was methodical where Clifford was theatrical, which meant he'd been the operational mind behind a company Clifford had been the face of. He didn't waste time. Mr. Frost, I want to be direct with you. Clifford has made decisions in the past several months that have put this company in a precarious position. I've been aware for some time that his judgment has been compromised in certain areas. Go on, I said. I'm not calling to negotiate, Roy said. I'm calling because the Compliance Board review is going to surface internal communications that implicate more than just his personal conduct. There are vendor agreement details, data licensing terms, things that touch on your group's interests. A pause. I want you to know that I intend to cooperate fully with the review process. I wanted to tell you that directly, rather than have it surface as a surprise. I appreciated that. I'll note it, I said. There's one more thing, Roy said. I found out this week that Clifford was aware of your connection to the Ardenfield Group before the party. He'd seen your name in the vendor documentation. He knew. A long pause. He just decided it didn't matter. The room went very quiet. He'd known. He'd looked at the documentation, seen my name, and decided the information was irrelevant. Decided that the quiet man standing across the marble floor with an untouched bourbon was not a factor worth calculating. That dollar in my glass hadn't been careless. It had been deliberate, which meant everything that followed hadn't just been consequence. It had been correction. Thank you, Roy, I said. I'll make sure the board is aware of your cooperation. I ended the call and walked to the window. Charlotte spread out below in the pale November light, the uptown towers glinting, the streets moving in their ordinary patterns. Colin appeared in the doorway. Everything okay? Better than okay, I said. Clifford knew who I was before the party. Colin was quiet for a moment. Then, he did it anyway. He did. My son leaned against the doorframe with his arms crossed and looked out the window beside me. Some men don't think consequences apply to them, he said, right up until they do. 25 years old, and he'd already learned the thing that took most men twice as long. I put my hand briefly on his shoulder. Then I went back to my desk and got back to work. The divorce documents arrived on a Monday morning. Courier delivery, 9 o'clock sharp, addressed to Vivian at Sheila's house. I knew the timestamp because David Kern had arranged a service and confirmed delivery by text. By 10:15, Vivian had called my number 4 times. I let all 4 go. By noon, Sheila texted, "She's read it. She's not okay. Richard, there's no alimony provision." I texted back, Clause 9 of the prenuptial agreement. 2009. She signed at brunch. Sheila didn't reply for several minutes. Then, she says she didn't understand what she was signing. I typed, "That's what counsel is for. She should retain one." That afternoon, Colin and I drove past the house together. Not to gloat. Colin had suggested it, said he wanted to see it one more time before things changed further. We parked across the street. The place looked the same, as always from the outside. The oak in the front yard had gone full amber. The porch light was off. "You're selling it," Colin said. It wasn't a question. "Already sold," I said. "Closed Friday." He turned. "That fast." "Corporate buyer. Cash transaction." The deal had been structured for 3 weeks. I just hadn't executed the final signature until the timing was right. I looked at the house. I didn't want to live in it anymore. Too many rooms that stopped meaning what they used to mean. Colin looked at the oak tree for a moment. "I learned to ride a bike in that driveway." "I know. Are you okay with letting it go?" I thought about that honestly. The house was wood and drywall, I said. What I built inside it, the years, the work, raising you, that doesn't go with the deed. He nodded slowly, looked at it one more time. Then, "Okay, let's go." We drove away and didn't look back. Vivian found out about the sale 2 days later when she drove past and saw a property management company signage on the front gate. Sheila texted me that evening. Asterisk, she showed up at my door in tears. Said the house was already gone. "Walter, this is..." Asterisk, she stopped herself. Started again. "I know you had every right. I just wanted you to know." I appreciated Sheila's honesty. I always had. Of the 2 women in that family, she was the one who'd never needed a story to be tidy. Meanwhile, Clifford Aldous' situation had continued developing without any further involvement from me. Roy Tillman had filed a separate internal report with the company's board, which triggered an independent review. 3 investors had requested documentation. The company's valuation had been quietly downgraded by 2 analyst firms. Clifford had not called again. He wouldn't. Men like that go silent when the audience disappears. The compliance board review concluded 9 days after I filed the disclosure. Their finding: the personal relationship constituted a material conflict under the vendor neutrality clause. The Ardenfield contract was placed under review. Clifford resigned from his CEO position on a Wednesday, effective immediately, with a statement his PR firm had clearly drafted: careful, bloodless, nothing admitted. Colin showed me the announcement over breakfast in my apartment. "Did you know this was coming?" he asked. "I knew the process would run where it ran," I said. "I didn't direct the outcome. I just submitted the documentation." Colin looked at the article for another moment. Then he closed his laptop. "He knew your name before the party, Dad. Roy told you that." "He did. And he dropped the dollar anyway." "He did." Colin looked at his coffee. "What do you think he tells himself about it?" I considered the question. Probably that he was unlucky, that he happened across the wrong man. I paused. Men like that rarely consider the possibility that the other man simply outworked them. Colin was quiet for a beat. Then he said, "I posted a follow-up to the LinkedIn piece." I raised an eyebrow. "Nothing aggressive," he said. "Just a line." It said, "My father never needed a headline. He just needed a pen and enough time." I looked at my son across the breakfast table, 25 years old, already understanding things that had taken me a decade longer to learn, and felt something settle in my chest that had been unsettled for a long time. "Thank you," I said. He picked up his coffee. "Don't thank me. Just make sure the next chapter is better than the last one." 8 months later, Colin flew back from Berlin for a long weekend. No occasion, no event. He just said he wanted to come home, which meant he wanted to see me, which was reason enough. I'd moved into a house in the Cotswold neighborhood by then, smaller than the old place, cleaner lines, a back porch that looked onto a strip of woodline that turned remarkable colors in the fall. I'd furnished it simply. Nothing from the previous house. Fresh start, fresh inventory. We drove up to Lake Norman on the Saturday morning. I had a friend with a dock, a retired circuit court judge named Harold Briggs who'd known me for 20 years and asked no unnecessary questions. He handed us 2 rods, pointed at the water, and went back inside to read. We fished for 3 hours without any agenda. The water was flat and silver in the morning light. A heron stood motionless near the far bank for the better part of an hour. Colin caught 2 bass and released them both. I caught one and did the same. At some point, without preamble, Colin said, "You could have told me earlier. About the money. About what you built." "I could have," I agreed. "Why didn't you?" I thought about it. Really thought. Not just reach for the easy answer. Because I wanted you to build your own sense of what you were capable of before you knew the size of what was behind you. Some men get handed context too early and spend their lives performing for it instead of earning past it. Colin turned that over for a while. The heron lifted off from the far bank without warning and disappeared over the tree line. "Mom called me last week," he said. "How was it?" "Honest, actually. More honest than I expected." He reeled in his lines slowly. "She said she spent a lot of years not asking the right questions. Said she was sorry she let me believe something that wasn't accurate." A pause. "I think she meant it." "Good," I said. "You don't have more to say about it than that." "No," I said. "She's your mother. That relationship is yours to manage. I'm not in it anymore." He looked at me. "You're not bitter." "I was for a while," I said. "Early on. Then I got busy." I looked at the water. "Bitter is expensive. I've spent 30 years learning to be precise with resources." Colin almost laughed. It was the closest thing to a real laugh I'd heard from him all weekend, and it was worth more than the whole drive up. "Clifford's company filed for restructuring last month," he said after a while. "I heard. And Vivian's wellness practice. She's still running it. Smaller clientele now, but running." "Good," I said. And I meant it, cleanly, without qualification. "Helen called you, didn't she?" Colin said. "Twice," I said. "Once to apologize for going to the news tip line. Once to thank me for the medical payments." "What did you say?" "The first time I told her there was no need to apologize. The second time I told her to take care of herself, and that the payments would continue until she no longer needed them." Colin was quiet. "Then, you kept the payments going." "She needed them," I said. "That doesn't change because the marriage ended." He looked at me for a long moment. "You're a strange man, Dad." "Probably," I agreed. We fished until noon. Then Harold came out with sandwiches, and the 3 of us sat on the dock eating, without much conversation, watching the water move. On the drive back, Colin said, "I want to come back more often." Not for any particular reason. Just more often. The porch light'll be on, I said. He looked out the road. Nodded once. That was enough for both of us. Some things don't need more words than that.